I never thought my life would come to this. Standing outside my own house, suitcase in hand, while the man who once swore to love my daughter slammed the door in my face. "Get out, old man. This isn't your home anymore," he spat, his eyes colder than the grave my daughter had just been buried in. My daughter, my only child. I had raised her after her mother died, pouring every drop of love I had into her life. She had been my reason to keep breathing. And now, not only had I lost her, but the man she married, the man I welcomed into my family, decided I was disposable. I could feel the neighbors watching. Some whispered. Some shook their heads. Me? I just stood there in silence, my hands trembling, my heart breaking, my mind screaming. But I didn't beg. I didn't cry. Not then. Because in that moment, as that door shut in my face, something inside me changed forever. He thought he had won. He thought I was weak. But he had no idea whose house he had just claimed as his own. And at the will reading, he was about to find out the truth. I wasn't always the broken, tired man you see now. Once I was just a simple father trying to give his daughter the life she deserved. When my wife died, my whole world collapsed. My daughter was only 6 years old then. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, holding her tiny hand, both of us crying because we didn't understand how we were supposed to keep going without her mother. But I couldn't give up. She needed me. So I worked. God, did I work. I took every shift I could, day shifts, night shifts, weekends. I fixed cars, cleaned gutters, even delivered newspapers in the mornings when money was tight. Sometimes I came home so exhausted that I'd fall asleep in my work boots, but I always made sure there was food on the table for her. I skipped meals more times than I can count just to make sure she never had to. I wore the same coat for 12 winters so she could have new shoes when school started each year. And yet, there were joys too, small moments that made the sacrifices worth it, like the way she'd run into my arms when I came home, shouting, "Daddy!" Or the nights we sat on the porch, eating ice cream I could barely afford, watching the stars and making wishes. She grew up strong, kind, and beautiful, and every milestone of hers felt like a victory for me. The first time she rode her bike, the first day of high school, her graduation, I was always there in the crowd, cheering the loudest. When she fell in love and told me she was getting married, I was scared. Scared that I'd lose my place in her life. But I pushed those feelings aside because all I wanted was her happiness. I gave them everything I could, even the house I had spent my whole life protecting. I wanted her to have a safe home, a place filled with love, a roof that would never leak over her head like it once did over mine. I told myself, if she's happy, then I've done my job as a fee. Other. And for a while I thought I had. We laughed together, celebrated holidays together, and I even grew close to her husband. I cooked for them, fixed things around the house, babysat when they needed. I treated him like the son I never had. I never remarried, never even thought about myself. My life revolved around my daughter. She was my pride, my reason for waking up each morning. So when she died, it wasn't just the loss of a child, it was the loss of my entire purpose. And what came after her death, the betrayal I faced, it nearly killed me. It began at the funeral, while my hands still smelled of flowers and my pocket still held the stones we'd thrown into her grave. He stood by the coffin like a stranger and leaned in so only I could hear him. "You've served your purpose. Don't expect to keep living with us now that she's gone." For a moment, the world tilted. I thought I'd misheard him, thought grief had scrambled my ears. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He looked at me as if he were looking through me. "I'm serious. This is my life now. I won't have you dragging us down." Shock slammed into me like cold water. I felt my knees go weak, and I had to grip the pew to keep from falling. People around us shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped in. The silence between them felt like a verdict. After the burial, When all the faces had dried their tears and moved on, he made good on his words. I came home. The house still smelled faintly of her perfume and the old lemon cleaner I used on the floors, and found the front gate locked. My toolbox was gone. The old framed photos of my wife and daughter were gone from the mantel. My hands trembled as I turned the knob. It was a different knob now. New lock, new owner. I walked around the side and saw things I kept for 50 years dumped like refuse on the curb. My worn coats. At the armchair with the burn mark from when our son-in-law had once left a cigarette inside. Boxes of my letters. He stood at the doorway, arms folded, and when I reached for the chair he'd shoved outside, he laughed. "Don't touch that. It's mine now." "Mine?" I whispered. "Mine? I have lived in that chair for 20 years. He spat the words like they were dirt. "Not anymore. You're not part of this family." My chest hollowed out with a sorrow so deep it tasted metallic. I remember clutching at the armrest of the porch like someone holding on to a cliff. "Please," I said, because pleading felt like the only thing left. "We can grieve together. We're family. He cut me off with a sneer. "You're in the way. This house needs to be put in order before the bank notices things. Pack your things." Disbelief roared through me. I replayed his face 100 times in my head. The man I had taught to shave, the man I had lent money to when business was slow, the man I had welcomed at my table. "How could you?" I asked aloud, more to the air than to him. "How could you throw me out when she just—" He rolled his eyes as if my pain were an annoyance. "Grief doesn't pay bills. It doesn't attract tenants. It doesn't keep a roof over a family's head. Move on." Humiliation burned hotter than grief. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Children pointed in the street. I felt small, exposed, as if every private sorrow had been splashed across the front lawn for the world to see. Then came the paper. An eviction notice slid under the door like a final insult. Signed, dated, stamped. His signature at the bottom, neat and deliberate. When I confronted him with trembling hands, he shrugged. "Everything's legal. My lawyer says you don't have a leg to stand on." My voice cracked. "This was my home. I raised her here. I paid for this roof with my sweat." He shrugged again, like I was speaking of some old, irrelevant furniture. "You did what you had to. So did I." Anger at first came like a dull het. Then it turned into something bright and sharp that cut through the fog of grief. I remember slamming my fist against the doorframe and feeling the sting of it, the sound echoing like a drum in an empty room. "How dare you?" I breathed, the words a promise more to myself than to him. He smirked, then, as if my pain was entertainment. "You should be grateful. I'm doing you a favor." The last straw was when he took down her pictures from the bedroom and replaced them with his trophies and certificates, placing them where her laughter used to hang. I stood in the hallway watching him rearrange my life and felt something inside break into a million glass pieces. Grief, shock, sadness. They all braided into one long rope that tightened into rage. By the time I walked away from that house with a single bag over my shoulder, I was no longer a man drowning in sorrow. I was a man who had been betrayed, and that betrayal burned so deep I could taste iron on my tongue. I kept thinking of all the small kindnesses I'd shown him, the times I'd covered for him, the nights I'd stayed up with him when he was ill. Each memory turned into a needle. The humiliation settled in my bones like cold, and a new voice inside me whispered that this could not stand. I would not be erased while she lay in the ground. I would not let him sit in my daughter's places and laugh as if he had earned them. Anger settled into a plant-shaped stone inside my chest. I left that night with more than sorrow. I left with a resolve that I would not be forgotten or dismissed so easily. I sat on a park bench long after the streetlights flickered off, the photograph of her folded in my palm like a secret, and the night air pressing cold against my face. My hands kept trembling, not from the chill but from something that had been building for days, an ache that would not go away. At first, it was all grief, a heavy, dull ache that hid behind my ribs and made each breath feel like a labor. I replayed faces, funerals, the sound of dirt hitting wood. Then came the humiliation, neighbors' pity, the whispering behind curtains, the lie that my life could be so easily discarded. I remember thinking helplessly that maybe I'd been broken beyond repair. Maybe a man who had given everything simply had nothing left to give. My inner voice, soft, pleading, kept asking, why her? Why me? What did I do to deserve this? But another voice, quieter at first, began to edge its way forward. It wasn't slick or loud. It was steady and cold. It said, you did your part. You loved. You kept your promises. Don't let an ungrateful son-in-law rewrite your story. I clutched the photograph to my chest and felt the pulse of memory, her laugh when she burned cookies, the way she fell asleep on my shoulder during thunder. Those memories were mine. No one could take them. The park around me blurred. Children's laughter from across the green felt obscene, like life going on when mine had been put on hold. I thought about every winter I worked 2 jobs, about the bandage I put on her scraped knee with trembling fingers, about the nights I sat awake worrying whether I had done enough. Anger started as a simmer, invisible at first, then boiled into something I could no longer ignore. I saw his face again, calm, sure, as if he had done nothing wrong. And I realized his ordinariness was the worst betrayal. He had taken without thinking, taken because he could. You pushed me out of the home I built, I whispered into the dark, and the words tasted like ashes. My grief sharpened into focus. The sorrow didn't leave, how could it? But it became a lens that showed me what had to be done. I thought of leaving quietly, of fading away like so many old men are expected to do. I pictured my things in boxes on a curb, my name erased from a mailbox. The image burned. No, not like that. Not when her memory was still warm in my bones. Patience rose up in me, a slow and dangerous thing. I would not act in the heat of blind fury. Fury would smash and scatter. I needed something like iron, quiet, deliberate, inevitable. I pictured days of waiting, watching, learning his patterns. I imagined legal papers and whispered conversations with people who still respected me. I thought of the will, of what might be hidden in plain sight. Grief braided with resolve. I would honor her by being more than a victim. I would honor her by reclaiming what was hers and what was mine. My heartbeat steadied as the plan formed in jagged but certain pieces. Every memory of sacrifice hardened into an argument I could not ignore. I rose from the bench, feeling the cold seep into my bones, and the heat of purpose fill the space grief had left. The photograph went into my pocket like a talisman. I pressed my hand over it and felt as if I could still feel her hand in mine. Enough, I said aloud, and the word rolled out of me like a starting gun. Not a cry for help, not a plea, a decree, a vow. I would not be humiliated to silence. I would not let his smugness become the final word on my life. I would make him remember what he had stolen, and remember that some things you cannot take without consequence. I walked home that night not as the man shoved onto the curb, but as someone who had decided to fight. And in the hollow place where grief had lived, I planted a hard, bright seed of revenge. I didn't sprint into revenge. I dressed it in patience. For weeks I moved like a ghost, present but unseen, watching the house from the corner of my eye. First I gathered facts, not out of malice, but because truth is a tool you can't break. I sat at the public records office for hours, leafing through deeds and old tax papers until my fingers went numb. There it was, a name on an old deed, faint but legible. My name. The house had never legally changed hands this way, he claimed. That discovery was the first grain of something that could become an avalanche. I didn't shout. I wrote it down. I photocopied the paper and tucked it into my coat like contraband. Next, I found an ally I hadn't expected, Mr. Hale from 2 doors down, retired and sharp as a tack. He'd watched the neighborhood longer than anyone. He remembered my wife's handwriting, the way we paid by check, the day I signed the mortgage. He didn't want any fireworks. He just wanted the truth to be seen. He agreed to testify to what he knew. Then I went to a lawyer, Not the thunderous kind from the movies, but a quiet woman who liked facts and hated bullies. "We don't shout," she told me. "We prove." She explained the slow machinery of title and testament in words I could hold. She drew up notices, looked at old clauses, and found a technicality the son-in-law had overlooked. While the lawyer did her work, I did mine. I learned the rhythms of his days. When he left for work, who he called late at night, where he kept papers. I paid attention to small things, a delivery route, the florist he favored, the bartender who knew too many secrets. I used patience like currency. I called old friends who had once been in the bank. I asked politely, I listened, I took notes. One of them lent me a copy of an appraisal from years ago. Another remembered a clerk who still had a card with a file number. Names stacked like evidence. I didn't threaten, I arranged. I coordinated. I sent letters that looked innocuous, but were actually legal probes, responses that put small, precise pressure on his story. I planted no lies. I gathered the truth until it became undeniable. Photocopies of receipts, old checks, utility bills under my name, each small paper a stitch, holding the whole case together. At night I practiced my voice, calm, steady, not the trembling old man he expected. I practiced telling the story, so it would land like a hammer when the time came. I kept one thing secret, even from my closest ally, how much this would hurt him in front of others. I wanted the reveal to be an emotional, surgical strike, not a messy brawl. There were moments of doubt. I ate bad diner coffee at dawn and wondered if any of this would matter. Then I'd see her handwriting in an old recipe card or hear her laugh in a phone message, and the doubts would slough off. I set small traps of normality. I let him think I had disappeared. I let him parade the house at neighborhood barbecues. Let him paint over the back porch if he wanted. Let him put his initials on things. Pride makes men careless. I synchronized the legal pieces with personal ones. A neighbor who still had the original key agreed to be present at the reading. The lawyer arranged for certified letters to be sent in a certain sequence, so there would be no excuse for surprise. I had paperwork ready to produce at the moment everything else quieted. The deed, the tax bills, the witness statements, and a simple statement from me, the man who had raised my daughter and paid for that roof with blood and sweat. And then a smaller, meaner part of the plan. I would let his arrogance do half my work. He would stand before friends and gloat. He'd tell the story of how he'd cleaned house. I wanted him to speak while the trap was set, so his words would echo when the truth landed. I won't tell you every step. That would ruin the satisfaction. Some parts I keep to myself because the joy is in the reveal. But I will say this. My preparation was not only legal, it was psychological. I learned to look calm while storms brewed. I rehearsed patience until it was second nature. I built a ladder slowly, plank by plank, making sure each piece could carry the weight of what was coming. There were nights I slept in a cheap motel just to be out of sight. There were afternoons I mowed Mr. Hale's lawn and left smiling like everything was ordinary. Secrecy is a humble thing. It wears work gloves and keeps its head down. Al. Lies came in quiet forms. An old clerk who verified a stamp. A neighbor who remembered when the roof was last repaired. A niece who agreed to post a family photo at the right time. None of them wanted drama. They wanted justice. I never lost sight of the pulse of the plan. Truth, timing, and the will reading. The will reading was the stage. Everything else was preparation to make sure the performance landed. So I waited. I fed patience with small rituals, a cup of tea at dawn, a walk around the block, a careful review of documents. He thought I'd melted into the pavement. He thought the old man was done. He was wrong. And when the moment comes, when paper meets air and truth meets faces, he will see how quietly a life can be rebuilt into something that cannot be stolen. That is all I'll say for now. Keep your eyes on the will reading, because when I stand up, I will not be the man he expected. The day of the will reading felt like the quiet before a storm. I walked into that small office with my shoulders straight and my hands folded, like a man who belonged there. He came in late, of course, dramatic, smug, with friends who laughed too loud and tried to make the room small with their chatter. I sat down and watched him from across the table, drinking in every careless gesture he made. The lawyer began with a dry voice and a stack of documents. "We'll read what's relevant," she said. She read the familiar names, the dates, the formalities. For a moment I let the normalcy of it wash over me, the sound of paper, the hush of chairs. And then the first knife went in. "As per county records," the lawyer said, "the property at 14 Willow Lane remains in the name of—" She looked up at me, slow and deliberate. "James Carmichael." I felt the air change. His face, which had been full of easy triumph, crumpled as if someone had pulled the strings of a paper puppet. He leapt up. "That's impossible. There's a transfer. I signed it. She signed it." He slammed a folder onto the table like a man throwing down a gauntlet. Papers spilled like autumn leaves. But I had not come unprepared. My lawyer smiled a small, patient smile and called for calm. She flipped through the pages, then held one up. "This document has not been recorded. The signatures do not match specimens on file. We have requested a handwriting analysis." A man I'd never met, a retired clerk who now worked part-time for our lawyer, shook his head and explained quietly that the stamp was the wrong shade, the ink incompatible, the dates written in 2 different hands. The room tilted for him. He searched the faces for support and found none. His friends shuffled, suddenly smaller, suddenly uncertain. He tried another trick. He produced a copy of a supposed bank transfer, a screenshot on his phone, and bragged about how he had already sold the property to cover taxes and expenses. We had already thought of that. My lawyer had subpoenaed bank records weeks earlier. The transfers he claimed had been faked. The bank told a different story. There were gaps, reverse numbers, a trail that led back to accounts he didn't control. A young bank clerk, called in by my lawyer, showed the printouts. The numbers did not add up. The transfers were inconsistent with dates, IP addresses, and logins. The clerk's voice was low but steady. "Sir, these transactions were flagged as suspicious." His bravado splintered into panic. He began to shout. He accused me of lying, of orchestrating some cruel joke. Then the twist I had been waiting for. I stood. I placed on the table the old mortgage books, the tax receipts, the letters she had kept in a shoebox, the little things he thought nobody would care about. I told them the nights I had gone without meals so she could have school shoes. I told them how I had signed every check, paid every bill, and how the house had remained under my name because I had never legally transferred it. The room listened. The same neighbors, who had once offered pity, now leaned in, their expressions shifting from curiosity to anger. He lunged for the folder and tried to snatch it, but Mr. Hale, steady and stubborn, had already come forward to speak. He remembered my signature. He remembered the day I had paid the last installment. His testimony was simple and true. A quieter, crueler twist unfolded. In his panic he made a call, loud enough for the room to hear, begging someone to fix this. That call became another set of evidence. The person on the other end, a man who occasionally did favors for him, later admitted he had been paid to forge a document. He finally said it aloud, trembling. "I was paid. I did it." The more he tried to claw his way back, the more the web tightened. Paperwork from his own business surfaced that showed loans and liens he'd never mentioned. Creditors' letters lay in a neat stack, dated, and one by one his illusions of security were stripped away. I watched as the man who had thrown me out turned into someone who could not keep his story straight. A horrified hush took over when the insurance company's representative, coaxed by a quiet phone call I'd made days prior, announced that an investigation had been opened into irregular beneficiary changes and unexplained withdrawals from my daughter's accounts. His face went ashen when the rep said, "We have reason to suspect unauthorized changes were made." He tried to laugh it off. No one laughed with him. By the time the lawyer read the final piece, the recorded deed in my name and the clear legal standing of my claim. The room moved like a living thing toward a verdict that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with truth. He stood, hands shaking, and tried to bargain. He offered money, then favors, then apologies that came out thin as tissue. Each apology landed like a stone tossed into a flooded cellar. Too late, and only making things worse. The last twist was the sweetest for all the right reason. As one of the men who'd been at his parties, a buyer of some of the furniture he'd tried to sell, stepped forward. He'd been offered the TV at a suspiciously low price. He testified he'd been told the house was sales-ready, that the titles were clear. He didn't know. He only wanted his refund when the truth came out. Neighbors whispered as movers who'd once loaded his furniture were now loading it out again, this time under the cold scrutiny of a legal order. When the sheriff's deputy handed him a formal eviction notice and a summons to appear in court over allegations beyond mere civil claims, forgery, fraud, and conversion, the arrogance that had once shone like a badge fell away. I felt a hollow victory then, a complicated kind of relief that tasted of metal and old tears. He was not jailed that day. The system moved slowly, but he was exposed. His friends drifted away like leaves on a stream. The people who had smiled at his parties stopped answering his calls. The final small cruelty of my plan was simple. I had arranged for the neighborhood to know the truth. Stories travel faster than lawyers. By the evening the truth sat heavy in the air, and he was left to walk the streets with his reputation shredded. I watched him carry his own boxes past the very porch where he had once shoved me. He kept his head down. He avoided my eyes. I did not dance. I did not gloat. I only sat in the silence of the house and let the truth weigh in the room where my daughter's laughter had once been loudest. When the last of his things disappeared down the road, I pressed my palm to the front door and felt, for a moment, like a man who had reclaimed a small corner of what had been stolen. But beneath that small triumph was something colder, a knowledge that justice had come late, that no law could stitch her back into life. Still, the betrayers had been unmasked. They had to. Oh, answer to what they had done. The stair creaked under my weight as I climbed to her room. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my knees tremble, not from weakness, but from the long release of strain. Outside, the night closed around the house like a soft hand. Inside, the house held its breath. And for the first time in many long days, I allowed myself to hope that the worst of the storm had passed. When the dust finally settled, the house felt both familiar and foreign. I sat in the living room that night, surrounded by furniture scarred by years of family life, scratches from my daughter's school projects, faint stains from birthday cakes. The silence was heavy, but it was my silence, mine to keep, mine to protect. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel like an intruder in my own home. And yet, victory tasted bittersweet. The man who betrayed me had been exposed, yes, but my daughter was still gone. No court ruling, no eviction notice, no revelation could bring back her laughter or the warmth she once carried into these walls. I walked through the room slowly, as if reacquainting myself with an old friend. Her bedroom door creaked open, and I stood in the threshold, unable to step in at first. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, trapped in the fibers of curtains and clothes left behind. I finally stepped inside and sat on her bed. My hands ran across her quilt, stitched by my late wife years ago. Tears came, uninvited but cleansing, washing away the anger I had held on to for so long. For weeks I had fed myself on fury, planning each move like a soldier preparing for war. But now, in the quiet aftermath, I felt something else. A fragile peace, thin as glass, but real nonetheless. The house had been reclaimed, but more importantly, my dignity had been restored. He had tried to make me feel like nothing, like a burden to be discarded. But I proved, to him, to the neighbors, to myself, that love and sacrifice cannot be erased with greed. In the following days, I made changes. I locked the paperwork away safely. I arranged for the house to one day pass not to strangers, but perhaps to children who would value it as a home, not just as property. I repaired the front steps, planted flowers in the garden, and painted the porch railings. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of my daughter's memory. Neighbors stopped by, some embarrassed they hadn't stood with me sooner, others offering quiet kindness. I accepted their words, but kept my heart guarded. Forgiveness, I realized, was not owed, not to him, not to anyone who had turned their back on me. But I did forgive myself, for the moments of weakness, for the anger, for the despair that had almost broken me. The moral of it all became painfully clear. People will show their true nature when greed and grief collide, but character is revealed in how we endure betrayal. I learned that revenge, though satisfying, was never the true prize. The true prize was reclaiming my place, my honor, and my voice. I could not save my daughter, but I could honor her by standing tall against the man who tried to erase me. As I lit a candle in her memory that night, I whispered a vow, not of revenge, but of guardianship. To guard her memory, to guard my home, to guard myself. And I understood then that justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is simply about truth finally being heard. So if there is one lesson to carry from my story, it is this. Never underestimate the strength of a heart that has been broken, but refuses to stay silent. The world may try to strip you of your worth, but dignity, once reclaimed, can never be taken again. That night, I closed my eyes in the house I had built, and for the first time since she was gone, I slept without dreams of rage, only of her smile.